Without further ado, I think we can start off with our first panelist. I would like to remind the panelists you have about 10 minutes to speak. We will then share some questions from our participants. And a reminder again to give us your questions in the question and answer section. Okay, so first we have Venda Premkumar. Thank you so much for joining us, Venda. Venda is a NEU branch secretary for Redbridge. She is an activist and a campaigner, and she is a secondary school teacher. Thank you very much, Venda. I'm going to start your 10 minutes now.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm an English teacher and I teach in an East London school in Redbridge. I'm pleased to be given this opportunity to talk to you all about my experiences as a Black educator and why we need an anti-racist curriculum. We can all agree that education can empower young people, but my experiences in a school for 14 years shows that schools can equally disempower Black students. Schools aren't places untouched by the inequalities of the real world. In my view, they perpetuate the racism of the outside world quite effectively. One of the most significant and most memorable moments of my own schooling was in year 12 in my literature class. We needed a break from Shakespeare, so my teacher got us to read a short story. He had chosen a story by an Indian writer called R.K. Narayan. Although he writes in English, his stories are set in Tamil Nadu, a state in India, which is where my family and I are from. I remember being secretly thrilled to be reading a book about people like me. They spoke Tamil, went to temples, and women wore saris. I wasn't particularly studious at school at that age, but later that week, I went to the public library and read everything I could by R.K. Narayan. When students can see themselves represented in what they are learning, when they can identify with it, this can be a very powerful and transformative experience. I went on to study post-colonial literature at university because I suppose I was seeking a validation of my own experiences and identity. How culturally diverse and responsive is our school curriculum today? How many opportunities are there now for child-centered learning? Michael Gove's reforms of GCSEs when he was Secretary of State for Education has only helped regress schools in this respect. In order to firm up a sense of British identity, which was apparently under threat, he introduced a number of damaging and regressive changes. For example, in GCSE English, this meant students can only study British writers. Irish, American, and post-colonial writers were off the curriculum, even though Britain's history and identity are intrinsically linked to these countries. What this means in practice is that students study a lot of male, white writers who are mostly dead. It's no wonder a lot of our students cannot relate to the curriculum and are not inspired by it. Like many other schools up and down the country, we replaced that much loved book of Mice and Men with Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, a Victorian novel about poverty and redemption. In class with students, we primed them for exams by discussing the fact Charles Dickens was a social reformer who wanted to improve the lot of the poor people in Victorian England. What we never discussed, though, is that at the time Dickens was writing, Britain was a huge empire, committing genocide on a global scale and looting from indigenous populations. We also failed to discuss that Britain was making a fortune out of slavery. Dickens never concerns himself with this side of British life, and as practitioners with the pressures of an exam factory culture, neither do we. The result is young people are being encouraged to see being British as something very homogenous. Colonialism and slavery are part of Black Britain's history. When Black history is silenced, so our Black children. I think as teachers, we are aware of the dangers of only listening to male voices and try to mitigate this in our pedagogical approach as best we can to ensure there is a gender balance. We don't necessarily do this when it comes to race. One day last year, my son brought home a year 8 history homework that asked him to consider the pros and cons of British rule in India. I was flabbergasted. It would never have occurred to to my son's teacher to consider the pros and cons of sexism, and yet, you know, it was okay to do that for colonialism. If we re-examined our teaching practice and the curriculum through the prism of race, we can mitigate some of the inequalities inherent in the curriculum. Not so long ago, I was discussing the merits of Black History Month with my Year 10 class. Many of the students noted that having 1 month dedicated to people of all colour only helped highlight the fact they were studying white history for 11 months of the year. One of my students, Zubin, made a further observation. Normally a class clown, he became very serious and thoughtful and said, even though Black History Month is tokenistic, they still don't talk about any Muslim people like me. Don't Muslim heroes exist? They only seem interested in us when they talk about terrorism. About 20% of our school population is Muslim. When I approached my school about having a Muslim speaker in, I was shut down. I suspect for fear of undermining the prevent strategy and calling into question the school's commitment to British values. The structural inequality in schools can perpetuate the racism that exists in the outside world. This manifests itself in attainment gap data and in the high rate of exclusions for Black students. Zubin is right to be angry. Instead of an insular, regressive white curriculum, why not create a culturally diverse curriculum that all students can identify with? It can be a powerful way to create an inclusive ethos and let young people know they belong. Another aspect of the curriculum that should concern us all is the inclusion of the term cultural capital in the new Ofsted inspection framework for early years education. Cultural capital is defined as essential knowledge that children need to prepare them for future success. A lot of Black children in the early years will be getting more than their fair share of culture, having to learn another language at home and navigating between 2 or more different cultures. None of this will get the credit it deserves though, because the term cultural capital immediately conjures up images of visits to the theatre, art galleries, reading classic literature and listening to classical music. All things that we would normally associate with white middle-class hobbies. In fact, a friend of mine, noticing that as a Black person, I might be considered deficient in cultural capital, ironically joked that I should listen to the Archers programme on Radio 4 to top up on my cultural capitalism. The reference to this radio programme is revealing. The Archers, it can be best described as a quintessentially English village that is largely monoracial. From the point of view of a Black educator, cultural capital for me is not about aspiration or social mobility, it is cultural oppression. To sum up, we have 2 choices as educators now. We can continue to teach the same old curriculum that alienates and silences Black students, or we can dismantle it. As a starting point, we should go back to our own schools and our own departments and review our schemes of work. We should examine them through the prism of race and class and gender if need be. We should listen to our students through student voice. Give students like Zubin a voice and he will tell you what needs to change. We can then build a curriculum that has space for differences, all types of differences, and that helps build confidence and self-esteem, and most crucially, lets all young people know that they belong. Thank you.